Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind podcast. My name is Duane and we are on to another episode. My guest today is Dr. Paula Hall. Dr. Paula Hall is an accredited sexual and relationship psychotherapist who specializes in helping people affected by sex addiction and porn addiction. Since her work in the field began over 15 years ago, she has become increasingly passionate about developing national and international services to meet the ever-growing problem. Furthermore, she campaigns for better education and social responsibility to protect others from falling into the sex addiction trap. She believes that overcoming sex addiction requires compassion, commitment, and courage, and she adopts these principles personally in her therapeutic approach. And today we're going to talk about her experience in this field as a psychotherapist, and we're going to talk about her pivotal recovery course and what led her to forming this type of course and what that means, and why podcasts like The Addicted Mind can be a form of therapy. What's really great about her course is that all the proceeds of her course go to her nonprofit that support research in this area of addiction. So that's very exciting. So I think this is a great episode. And if you think The Addicted Mind is great, please rate and review us in iTunes. That really does help. It really helps the podcast get found. I really appreciate it. I read them. They mean a lot to me. So thank you for all the people out there who have taken the time to do that. And you can also find us on Instagram at Addicted Mind Podcast. And don't forget, click the subscribe button so you can get all the latest episodes in your podcast feed. All right, everyone, stay tuned for this episode. All right, everyone, welcome to The Addicted Mind. My guest today is Paula Hall, and we're going to talk about sex and porn addiction and treatment and how to get treatment and what that looks like. So, Paula, why don't we just jump in? You introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and why this is an important area of work for you.
Yeah, hi. So, I'm Dr. Paula Hall, based in the UK, as you may be able to tell from the accent. And I started in therapy it was 30 years ago now. And I started initially in the statutory sector in drug and alcohol work, and then trained as a couple therapist, and then I trained as a sex therapist. And basically my journey into sex addiction was working with, a couple of clients that I can remember so clearly now, really struggling with these compulsive behaviours before we had any language for it. This is pre-internet. Porn was not an issue back then. But didn't really have any language for what was happening for them. And we explored their family of origin stuff. We did all sorts of different things, but frankly, nothing worked. And then I went to a conference and someone started talking about this thing called sex addiction. And it was just like penny drop moment. Oh my goodness, this is what I've been dealing with. And that must have been about, at least 15, 18 years ago, and then started specializing it. And I think for me, there is the thing that really hooked me into this field is working with men, in part. If I'm honest, I've generally always been in work environments that have been about men. I think men often don't have a voice. I think women can often be the ones who think we're the ones that do all the intuition, do all the emotion, do all this, that, and the other, and then we wonder why so many men end up with addictive problems, because we kind of tell them they can't do this stuff.
Yep.
And so I think it was the fact that I found myself mostly working with men, and that kind of appealed to me, but also being completely misunderstood. And sex addiction and porn addiction is so misunderstood by professionals, as I'm sure you're aware, as well as by society. And that touches a lot of my personal stuff, a lot of my childhood stuff around not really being understood. And I think that's why I got into this.
Or having a voice for this. And I think you're so right in this field, especially back then. Yeah, there was no language. And, there is still debate on the language. Some people want to call it sex addiction. Some people want to call it compulsive sexual behavior, out of control sexual behavior, however they call it. I think most everybody agrees that this is an issue for people that was, I guess, kind of hidden because of all the shame around sexuality, and we didn't talk about it. And you're right. I had a very much similar experience. These people come in and it's like, this is a real issue for them. This is something big. And it's like, It's not just about just stopping, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not with any addiction. You've got to look at obviously what's going on underneath, what the drivers are. And I think for so many people, and I don't think this happens so much in the chemical addiction field, which is like, I was trained in that field as well as being a sex therapist. You don't get many others where they question, is this really a problem or not? Or is this a character default? In this, it's, maybe I just don't love my partner. Maybe this is just the person I am. Maybe this is just the way I've been designed. And just really questioning their whole identity, because it does become about their relationship with themselves as well as their because I think our sexuality is such a essential part of our humanity, of who we are. When you're struggling with that aspect of your identity, I think you really start questioning your own identity, not just your behavior.
Yeah, I think that's so important to be able to make a point about, because that goes into that bigger picture where it's not just about this behavior. There's all these other issues going on. And for like a lot of people, when they go to traditional talk therapy, it doesn't necessarily really solve the problem. Like you were saying earlier, you tried all these things and in a traditional sense, and it's like, this didn't work. Yeah. It's like they're still stuck here in this cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's, obviously, talk therapy does work for many, but I think it's giving it time to kind of process. And I think it's also about the language. And again, what I've really noticed working primarily with men, I think there's an awful lot of traditional therapy that actually isn't that accessible for an awful lot of guys, a lot of blokes, a lot of dudes, a lot of lads, that haven't come from a certain education or class background where they talk about feelings and that kind of stuff, or are used to that internal dialogue that you need to learn to develop in order to make use of therapy. So I think we have to adapt some of the tools that we use and the approaches that we have. I'm a huge fan of group work, so I do think, and there's something incredibly powerful about getting a group of men together and them learning from each other. I think that's a really important part of the journey as well. But it is about combining the very, very practical, pragmatic behavioural change techniques, the relapse prevention, the recognising triggers, with also exploring what's going on underneath, what's driving the behaviour.
Can you talk a little bit about those two things? Because I think that can be really confusing in the sense of, if I just understand my history, then I'll just stop my behavior, or maybe I'll understand why I do it and then I'll just stop. And why that doesn't always work. We can know our history and then we still go out and do the things that aren't good for us, even though we know why we're doing it. And so talk about that with the combination of this behavioral part.
I think that, and we are learning so much more about this because of the work that's happening in neuroscience, which is great. And the other thing, I am really passionate about the psychoeducational piece. And I talk a lot about how many people don't overcome this problem because they don't understand this problem. And if you're trying to, hammer a nail in with a saw, it ain't going to work. And actually, it's you're using the wrong tool because you don't understand what the problem is. Therefore, the psychoeducational work on understanding the problem is really critical. And we know that there are biological components, and I'm sure you're aware of this, all the neuroscience about the way that addiction changes the brain, changes the neural pathways in the brain. And then, of course, there are the psychological components. There are the social components as well. So I come very much from a biopsychosocial perspective. And so once something's got set up biologically, that is just what we do. So we could have a huge conversation about why is it that you play the piano and what is it that got you into that, or what are your driving forces for you still play the piano. It's not actually going to change any of that. You're still very good at playing the piano. And still, if you open the keypad up, you're in position, you're there. Your fingers are in position in your legs, you know how to do it. And that's because of the neural pathway change. So, and again, I think if you don't combine both of these bits, you can sit in therapy for years and not change anything behaviourally. But conversely, you could go purely on a behavioural change course, but because you haven't changed any of the unconscious drivers, it's only a matter of time before you trip up again because the old stuff comes in. But I think also the challenge for many people is if you think about addiction as being an anesthetic, it's a way of numbing out difficult emotions quite often. Until the anesthetic's worn off, many people aren't aware what those emotions are. So again, that's where talking therapy, I think sometimes has historically got it wrong, because it's let's talk about your feelings. As well, I haven't got any. I don't have any. I'm fine. I'm still. The reason you're fine is because you've been acting out for the last 30 years. You're going to have. It's often. I think there's some research into this. It's about 12, 16 weeks into sobriety, and I use that word deliberately. So I don't think you're in recovery. Then you're just sober. Frankly, the shit hits the fan, and all that old stuff starts coming back.
Yeah.
And that's when the relapse happens. But there's
that
no point analysing it
neurobiology, the history, the trauma.
Exactly. All that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So all that stuff comes back. So you have to be able to do that in both ways. I want to go back to your analogy a little bit about playing the piano. And, of course I play the piano, and that's a very positive behavior that And I would like to see how to make the comparison to and flesh that analogy out a little bit more about how that's different when it's a sex addiction or porn addiction, when you're using that compulsively, and how like you're playing the piano there, but that's a positive thing, but you're doing this too the neural pathways are similar, I guess.
Yeah, and now I'm slightly regretting not choosing the metaphor. I don't play the piano, but never mind. So if there's anybody out there who's listening to this who's a pianist, I apologise now if I'm being incorrect in my metaphor. I should have thought of something else. But I think it's about that repetitive function. Obviously, we get good at playing the piano, or what other people do, by practicing, and that strengthens the neural pathways so that it becomes almost automatic. So if I'm working with somebody where it's porn addiction, initially it would have taken a little bit of effort to think about seeking porn out and where they're going to seek it. And then at first it might feel a little bit awkward, and it takes a while to kind of chill out and get into the zone, and then they might enjoy it. Once they practice, and really addiction is just people who practice a lot from neurological perspective. So once you've practiced that a lot, actually you're opening the lid of your laptop or your laptop, or you're opening a page on the browser on your phone, on your tablet, whatever, without even thinking about it. It's so automatic, because what started as something that took some cognitive effort has now become a habit. I'm often asked, what is the difference between a habit and an addiction? And I think the answer is dopamine. Is that actually, precisely as you say, whilst you might get a real hit from playing the piano, it's not going to be quite the same hit of dopamine that you get from sex or porn, because you obviously you get that real mega hit because it's part of this wired into survival. So it's really about the way that I was using the metaphor and the way in which habits develop, and you can start doing things automatically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Before I knew it, I was actually standing outside a massage parlor, and I can't even really remember doing the Googling, doing this, that, and the other, or when I planned it. Often when we talk to people about relapse, you might say, so when did you start thinking of it? Often it was just, I can't really remember. I was on the phone. Why did you act out? Because it was Thursday. Trying to find some deep, meaningful.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what I do on Thursdays. And it's because it's become so habitual.
And I think what you were saying earlier, what's so important about that is that, like you said, it takes time away from these behaviors to be able to start to see the impact. Like, oh, now I see why I did that on Thursday. It wasn't because it was Thursday. It was because now that I'm kind of thawing out in my sobriety, I start to see these emotions, and then I can start to put those together and start to go, oh, I do that when I'm feeling stressed or anxious, or when I have a traumatic memory, but you can't tell that until you have some time away. So people get, I think, really, it's easy to miss. It's easy. I just do it because I just do it. Like you said, I just do it because it's there, but it's not really that. You have to have some space.
Yeah. I don't think all acting out is triggered by emotion. I mean, having worked with chemical addiction as well, if you don't have to feel down every time you light a spliff. It's just
Yeah.
It just becomes, it's just what I do. It becomes part of your identity. It becomes what you do. So one of the things I think that distinguishes me from some other people that work in this field is I don't label my clients as addicts. I really hate the term addict. You're an addict. You have an addiction. I don't like suffering from an addiction either, because that's like all two victim stance. But you're not an addict. You're someone who has an addiction. I understand from the 12-step perspective, it's really important to break denial, to acknowledge what's going on. But I think if you start absorbing addiction as part of your identity, I think that can be unhelpful personally. So often you'll know people who've worked with me or followed my program because they'll say, "Hi, my name's Duane and I have sex addiction or porn addiction," rather than "I am a sex addict." So something about separating it from your identity, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I agree with you too in the whole addiction field on that, because when you put that into your identity, it almost locks you into that role. Exactly. And that's, we're more than our role. Yeah. We are bigger than our role that we put ourselves in, and the self is bigger than that. And being able to take on that part of the journey, and I guess that part of the spiritual journey in a way, who are we, exactly. Ourself and all that.
And actually going back to the piano metaphor, I guess, because you're saying, well, very rightly, it's a very positive thing. And actually, if you are learning to play the piano, often you're someone who's learning to play the piano, and then you're someone who plays the piano. If you keep practicing enough, you become a pianist. And you're proud of the fact that part of your identity is being a pianist, because it's a positive thing. You want that. And we know in terms of positive habit change, the people who become runners exercise more than the people who go running. When it actually is absorbed positively in your identity, it's a good thing. So I think we have to be conscious of doing the reverse of that for people getting into recovery. So they're not, they are in recovery from addiction, not, become an addict.
And over time, that like you said, over time they can change that identity, or how they see themselves in this moment of time, because there's so much shame with sex addiction and porn addiction, and that becomes part of their identity too.
Yeah.
And when they're in recovery, they can change that. They can start to be different, and like you said, over time, now they become a person that feels like they have integrity, a person that tries to live honestly, that takes care of themselves, take care of the people they love, instead of, having the addiction kind of run it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you're working with people, tell me a little bit about how you start this journey with them. They come into your office or they come into your program. What's the first thing you're going to tell them, and how do you start to move them through that process?
I mean, so I'm a traditional psychotherapist in terms of seeing people face to face or on Zoom a lot now since COVID. And we run group works at the Laurel Centre as well. So the Laurel Centre is a big sex addiction practice in the UK. It's 25 therapists, and it's lots of group work and lots of partner work as well. So in that kind of traditional setting, of course, first and foremost, it's listening. It's really hearing the story of the client and where they're at and what's going on for them. And I think also finding out what's most urgent. And actually, so in our client I saw for the first time yesterday, what's actually most urgent is that I don't act out on my next business trip. For some it actually is how I support my partner. For some it is, another client I've got is very, very sure he'll never, ever, ever, ever act out again. Ever, ever, ever. I've heard that so many times. And actually the most important thing is about understanding what's going on underneath. And I think it's really important to hear that and acknowledge that, but then also to give kind of the framework of how to work. And I suppose a question that two questions I asked very early on in therapy. One is why now? Why didn't you come 2 weeks ago? Why didn't you put this off until after Christmas? Why now? What's actually going on for you now? The other one I've just instantly forgotten. That's clever. But another question is, how will you know when you've done enough therapy? How will you know when you are cured in recovery, whatever language that they're using, so that and to get them beginning to think about how they might feel when this is not just how they'll behave. Well, I won't act out. Well, that's the obvious one. But what else? How will you know that you really can be confident in your recovery? So again, it's about finding out what's kind of important for them.
It's like both sides of it, right? Like what got you here and what do you want your life to be like? And, it's like each side of that, pushing them and their different motivations about each of those pieces, right? One is I got to get away from something, and one is I'm going towards it, and this is what I want to achieve. And I it's like, and then, encouraging them to do that and to take that work on. And we were talking earlier before we started recording about how difficult it is to get this work, to be able to get access to this work, because when you start to do that, move away from this and move towards this, it is a long road. It's not easy in my experience. It's a lot of work, and that work takes time. It takes access to the resources that you need to do that work. And so I want to transition a little bit to what you're doing, because you have the Pivotal Recovery course, and you made that so people could have access in a way that's easier to get to and get some of this material. And is also therapy, and that can be expensive. It can cost a lot of money to get that kind of treatment. So
absolutely,
let's jump in there and talk about that.
I think the work we do at the Laurel Centre is brilliant. Obviously, I think it's great. And we do have bursary schemes, and we do have take on some low cost clients. But, therapists that are working for me, myself, we've got mortgages to pay, kids to raise, so on and so forth. Got to pay the bill.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But for many years, I've wanted to try and find a way of actually providing something low cost. And I have written some books, so that's one way of doing it. But really having something that was much more accessible. So initially, when I started thinking about how to do pivotal recovery, I was thinking it might be a video course. It might be that, but of course, people don't watch videos anymore.
Right.
It's much more about podcasts, which is why it's so important for me to be on this platform to talk about it. So pivotal recovery, it took a long old time, took about 18 months to put together, is actually 60 podcasts, so 60, 15 to 20 minute podcasts.
Wow.
And an accompanying workbook. So basically the idea is you listen to the podcast and then you think about how that applies to your individual situation and circumstances, and you make some notes in your workbook. On some podcasts, so the podcast where we're talking about understanding triggers and recognizing where triggers come from, in the workbook, there's also going to be a worksheet. So there are some very practical, pragmatic exercises. Right. And some of them might be in the workbook, might be more, okay, so let's think of these 4 or 5 core emotions. Now, here's some space to think about times in your childhood when you experienced that. Who were you with? Who showed you most love? Or where did you learn anger? And who were the people you didn't experience it from, for example? So the workbook is not just a place for reflections, but it's also a place where there are some very specific kind of exercises as well. And the 60 sessions are guiding you through the choice recovery model, which is something that I wrote about in the book that came out, years ago, about 8 years ago now. And so that is, it starts off with the psychoeducational stuff. What is sex addiction? And talking about the biological, the psychological, the relational, and the sociocultural aspects of it. But then moves into the C of choice, is about looking at your own core beliefs. And again, in my experience, many people have previously failed in recovery because of a faulty core belief that hasn't been addressed. I'll never succeed. A client I was speaking to just before coming on air, talking to you actually, was saying, he says, well, yeah, but people don't really change, do they? But, now that is really going to trip him up further down the line. People don't really change.
Yeah.
So, because we're looking at change. So where did you learn that belief? If you don't really identify your core beliefs, they're going to trip you up later. I'm a failure. I never stick to anything. shame, I don't deserve anything
Right.
better than this. So I remember another client saying to me, I think maybe the problem is I don't really believe there's a better life than this out there for me. Okay, faulty core belief. That is why you
Wow.
keep relapsing, because you
Yeah.
end up going back to that. So they're the beliefs that sabotage recovery. So that's the choice
And
model is an acrostic.
I was going to add to that, often we're not even aware of these beliefs at all until we start to really talk about them and really think about them. Sometimes these beliefs are so automatic in our thinking, we
Absolutely.
don't even realize they're beliefs. We treat them as fact. We treat them as,
Exactly.
this is it. There's no alternative. And we don't even contemplate an alternative. It's like, this is
Yeah.
fact. And we don't even know they're a belief, right? To make a choice about. And
Yeah.
that, I mean, in and of itself, I mean, that's why you do this work, right? You do this writing, you do this journaling, you talk therapy so that you, like, I love that idea where then, with that, you have some ability to make a choice about something different,
Yeah.
something,
Because you can't
an
all the time.
alternative.
Yeah, all the time it's so deeply ingrained. Actually, that's guiding your choices. So choices, it's an acrostic for the 6 steps, but it's also the philosophy that I follow that actually, I think addiction robs people of choices. You start doing things automatically that you don't really want to
Yeah.
do. And actually, this is about getting back into the driving seat of your life again. And, pivotal is about turning around your life. And so I think that there's 6 sessions all on the first C of challenging core beliefs. The H is about have a vision, exactly what
Yeah.
you were saying earlier. It's not just about what you're getting away from, it's what you're driving towards. How is your life going to be without this? What is your vision of the future? And I do think positive motivation is so essential. The O is about overcoming the behaviours. And I think this is the bit where I've really grown as a therapist. I used to think many years ago, all you had to do was stop. I now recognise that's just one step. So the overcoming your behaviours is the nuts and bolts of relapse prevention, identifying your triggers, your cognitive distortions, having relapse prevention strategies. That's the nuts and bolts. And I think so many clients think that's all I need, don't need the rest of it. Not at all. The I is about identifying positive sexuality. What does that mean to you? What does it look like? What is a positive sex life for you? We talk about masturbation. We talk about mindful masturbation. We talk about kinks and fetishes. We talk about what role that might play. Is that actually an escalation or is that part of your sexual template? So helping people
Right.
to
Yeah.
really solidly think about what is positive for them. What does positive sexuality mean for them? And I very deliberately say positive, not healthy, because the opposite of healthy is unhealthy. And I don't think that's quite what we mean. It's what is
Right. I
actually going
like
to be
that.
life affirming for you. And I think one of the things I say to the clients sometimes when I do group work is my goal is to make your sex life better than it's ever been before. And I think sex addiction
Yeah.
robs people of a fulfilling sex life. So the I is about identify
Absolutely.
positive sexuality, CHOI. The next C is about connecting with others, whether that's within 12 steps, whether that's within another recovery group, but also with friends. So many people isolate in addiction. So that's, really developing meaningful friendships and actually being able to learn to connect with other people. And then the final E is about
Yep.
establishing confident recovery. And you must have heard this so many times. Recovery is about what you take up, not what you give up. It's about what you take up. So actually,
Yeah.
start
I
learning
love
the
that statement.
piano. Start learning the piano. What are you going to replace it with? Because otherwise, you've just got a big hole in your life. And nobody wants that. What do
Yeah.
you want to do? Let's look at all those different hobbies and pastimes. But it's also about, and part of that personal development of actually, if you want long-term recovery, I need to work on those anger issues. That's stuff that we were identifying earlier on in the program. I need to work on that. Yeah. And okay, yeah, I really need to develop gratitude. I've got to start doing that and learning optimism and so on and so forth. So you can see why 60 sessions
And
is
these
quite a
are
lot
all
to get in.
doable.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing that's wonderful about it is these are doable. Like you do it a small step at a time, and I have this saying, and I don't know where I got it, but it's small hinges swing big doors, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to make huge, you just have to make consistent changes. And in each of these, I love these domains. In each of these domains
Yeah.
that you have by this choice model. And you can do one thing in those domains, in each of those domains, and they don't have to be this huge thing. I think people, when they get into recovery, obviously they're in crisis and everything's, often when they get into our offices, it's because of a crisis and everything's a mess. And it seems so overwhelming. But recovery is about small, consistent changes over time. And it doesn't have to be, it is overwhelming, but it's not overwhelming. Yeah. Just keep going forward.
I think the other thing I've really embraced, and we're doing a lot of research on this as well, by the way. So we're actually going through a pilot study with partners with the university that we're going through at the moment. But the other thing that I say in this is actually it's your choice when you stop acting out. Obviously, if it includes offending now, your partner might be saying now, but otherwise, if you're not ready, I hate all these counting days. Day 1, day 2, day 47. Oh, day 1. Going back, you give up when you want to, but the vast majority, I think something like 85% of the people that have done the course by day 30, so part 1 is about stopping, part 2 is about staying stopped. And by the time they get to day 30, they are ready. Not only do they want to change. They want to change. And I think sometimes people try and make that change when actually they're not quite ready to do it. It's still feeling like they should change. They need to change, but actually they want to change. And of course, all of this is 90. I did the currency conversion before I came on. $91 for the whole lot. So this is Pivotal Recovery it's not a charity. So it's not for profit. We're a not-for-profit organisation. The plan is that any profits from this are going to go into research and go into education, because we really need to educate people about this problem. So I set it up as a not-for-profit. So $91, you get the course. You can do it in your own time. Yeah,
that is so amazing, and I like what you say. In working with clients and working in this field as well. Yeah, I can see that moment in clients when they take it on and it is a desire to be better. And it's so amazing to watch that. And then it's amazing to watch them when they make that transition to working hard, but actually seeing the positive outcomes. They start to see their life and they're like, it's amazing. I mean, that's, I think, probably why we both do this work. It's amazing to see and to be a part of that process. So it's life-changing. And I love that you're putting research into this and money into this so that we can get even clearer and help more people, help ourselves. And I just love that. So, okay, before we wrap up, I always like to ask one question to my guests. And if someone out there is struggling, they're listening to this podcast, and you could tell them one thing, what would you want to know? What would you want them to know?
You can change.
You can change. I love it. Paula, thank you so much for coming on. Where can they get the links, or what is the link so that people know that and they can go to that?
Pivotalrecovery.org. It's not an alternative to therapy. Anyone listening, I'm not suggesting it's an alternative, but if you're not sure where to start, if you can't afford therapy or you're not sure whether that's right for you, start with Pivotal Recovery, pivotalrecovery.org, and then see where that takes you.
Awesome. I will put all the links in the show notes, so you can just go to theaddictedmind.com as well and get that there. Paula, thank you for coming on, sharing your wisdom, sharing your experience, and just giving that gift to all the listeners out there.
Thank you.
So I hope that you got a lot out of that interview with Dr. Paula Hall. And as usual, you can find all the links in the show notes at theaddictedmind.com. So check them out there. And if you want to continue the conversation online, join our Facebook group. Just go to Facebook and type in The Addicted Mind podcast and click join. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day. And I'll talk to you on the next episode.